Okay, so get ready for this one because it's a wild ride. We're diving into the story of Jeffrey Locker, a successful motivational speaker, the kind of guy who tells you to chase your dreams and all that. But guess what? This guy ends up murdered in Harlem. And it's not just a simple case of wrong place, wrong time. It gets way more complicated than that. Think hidden lives, shocking revelations, the whole 9 yards. Oh, and did I mention our main source for this deep dive is a German true crime YouTube video? Yeah, we're going international with this mystery.
It's fascinating, really. You have this image of a perfect life, right? Locker had the family, the career, the money, the house, the American dream. But as we'll see, it was all a facade.
So picture this. July 2009. Locker's giving a presentation all about achieving success. He calls his wife, mentions a flat tire, says he'll be home soon, but he never makes it.
Instead, his body is found miles away from his Long Island home, in Harlem, in his car. Multiple stab wounds, hands tied behind his back. And get this, the car's parked next to a fire hydrant.
Doesn't exactly scream random act of violence, does it?
Nope, it's definitely staged.
So, naturally, the police initially focus on robbery as a motive, especially given the location, right?
Yeah, Harlem wasn't exactly known for being a safe neighborhood back then.
But then things take a weird turn, starting with Locker's wife.
What was strange about her?
Well, her reaction to his death was, how do I put this? Oddly unemotional.
Interesting.
And to make things even stranger, his cell phone was missing?
Not exactly typical grieving spouse behavior.
Not at all.
And then there's the matter of the condoms they found in his car.
Condoms. Yeah.
Condoms.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. So we've got a seemingly successful guy found murdered. His wife is acting strangely. And now we've got condoms thrown into the mix.
Sounds like our motivational speaker might have had a secret life.
A double life, maybe.
Exactly.
So did the police find anything about this potential secret life?
They tried. Interviewed sex workers, checked hotel records, even looked into whether he might have been secretly gay.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, they explored every angle,
And
dead ends, all of them.
it's like this part of his life, if it even existed, was completely off the grid. This is getting more and more bizarre by the minute.
Wait, it gets even weirder.
Weirder than condoms and a potentially secret life? How is that even possible?
The autopsy results.
What about them?
All the stab wounds were inflicted from the passenger seat.
From the passenger seat.
Yeah,
But he was driving, right.
supposedly.
So how does that even work?
Exactly.
Okay, so now we're talking about someone else being in the car. And remember that flat tire story he told his wife?
Oh yeah, that's another strange detail.
Turns out all 4 tires on his car were in perfect condition.
No flat tire, no car trouble.
He lied. So now we have even more questions. If it wasn't a robbery and the prostitution angle led nowhere, then what was he doing in Harlem? And why lie to his wife?
Well, remember those motivational speeches about financial success?
Yeah, what about them?
Turns out, Locker wasn't just talking the talk. He was walking a very risky walk, financially speaking.
Uh-oh, I have a feeling this is where things take a dark turn.
You could say that.
So spill the beans. What was he involved in?
He was deeply involved in some, let's just say, less than ethical financial schemes.
Less than ethical.
Like, potentially illegal.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He was entangled in a boy band investment.
A boy band.
Yep, a boy band.
You can't make this stuff up.
Orchestrated by a man named Perlman. And this wasn't just any investment, mind you. It was a classic Ponzi scheme.
Ponzi scheme. So, like, promising huge returns, but ultimately destined to collapse.
Exactly.
So Locker was not only a motivational speaker, but also a con man?
It gets worse.
Worse. How could it possibly get worse than running a Ponzi scheme?
He was the one who convinced many people, close friends, golf buddies, to pour their savings into this doomed venture.
No way.
So
this follow your dreams guru was actually leading people into financial ruin.
pretty much.
The hypocrisy is astounding.
And you can imagine what happened when the scheme imploded.
Wow.
Those people lost everything.
Oh, wow. So now the police have a whole new angle to consider. They have a long list of people who lost money because of Locker, all of whom could have wanted him dead.
You've got a whole bunch of potential suspects, each with a motive for revenge.
This whole thing is like a powder keg waiting to explode.
And the media, of course, ate it up.
Oh, I bet. A seemingly perfect motivational speaker turned out to be a con man, and then he ends up murdered. That's a headline writer's dream.
It was a media frenzy.
So what happened? Did the police ever manage to crack this case wide open?
Well, they got an anonymous tip.
A tip. About what?
It just mentioned boy band.
Boy band. Yep, that's all it said.
cryptic much.
Right.
But it was enough to send the police back to the Ponzi scheme, right?
Right.
Back to Locker's connection with Perlman.
Exactly.
So did they find anything useful?
They interviewed Locker's financial advisor, and he spilled the beans about the extent of Locker's financial losses and the potential for revenge among those he'd swindled. So now the police have this massive pool of suspects. Did they manage to narrow it down at all?
They focused on a few individuals, including a man who had lost a significant amount of money and had even threatened Locker openly.
Sounds promising.
But each suspect had a solid alibi.
Another dead end.
Yep.
So how did they ever catch a break in this case?
Well, weeks after the murder, Locker's bank card was finally used.
Aha, a lead.
It led them to Kenneth Miner, a recently released ex-con with a history of drug abuse and robbery.
Finally, a solid lead. So what happened when they confronted Miner?
He denied any involvement, of course.
But they had him dead to rights, right?
Not exactly.
What do you mean?
They decided to use a risky strategy.
What kind of strategy?
They showed Miner a fake lab report,
A fake lab report.
claiming his fingerprints were found in Locker's car.
Wow, that's bold. What happened?
Faced with what he thought was irrefutable evidence, Miner confessed
He confessed.
to being in the car, yes.
So they got him.
But then he dropped a bombshell that no one saw coming.
A bombshell.
He claimed Locker asked to be killed.
Wait, what?
He said Locker offered him money to stage a murder that looked like a robbery.
You're telling me this motivational speaker, this guy who seemingly had it all, wanted to die.
That's what Miner said.
This is insane.
It's definitely a twist no one saw coming.
So now we've got a desperate motivational speaker, a recently released ex-con, and a murder plot that might actually be a suicide pact. This just keeps getting more and more complicated. Where do we go from here?
So we're left with this shocking confession. Assisted suicide. But why? Why would this successful motivational speaker want to die?
I mean, it's hard to wrap my head around. This guy had a family, a career, a seemingly comfortable life.
Well, according to Miner, Locker was trapped in a financial nightmare.
A nightmare.
The boy band Ponzi scheme had imploded, remember?
Oh, right.
He was drowning in debt, facing lawsuits from the people he'd convinced to invest. It wasn't just financial ruin, though.
What else?
Public humiliation.
His perfect image would be shattered. So the follow your dreams guru was living a nightmare of his own making.
You could say that.
It's tragic, really.
And according to Miner, Locker saw his own death as the only way out.
The only way out.
He thought it was the only way to protect his family.
Protect them from what?
From the financial fallout, the shame,
Yeah.
the public scrutiny,
He had that life insurance policy, right?
the $12 million one.
Yeah, that one.
He believed that money would secure their future.
Even if it meant ending his own life.
It's a twisted logic, but I guess that's how desperation works.
It's hard to imagine the kind of pressure he must have been under.
I can't even imagine.
But how did he convince Miner to help him? I mean, to actually participate in something like that.
Locker was a master manipulator, remember?
Oh, yeah, the motivational speaker.
Exactly. He knew how to target people's vulnerabilities.
And Miner was definitely vulnerable.
He was desperate for money, stability.
The perfect target.
Locker offered him cash up front with the promise of more after his death.
So he basically framed it as a win-win situation.
A win-win for them, anyway.
It's chilling to think that he used those same skills he used to inspire people, to manipulate someone into helping him end his life.
It really makes you think about the dark side of charisma and persuasion.
So what actually happened that night in Harlem? How did this assisted suicide actually play out?
It's a pretty disturbing story.
I can imagine.
Miner claims they drove to Harlem. Locker parked the car. And then, while Miner held the knife, Locker stabbed himself.
He stabbed himself.
Multiple times.
Wow.
It's a horrific image.
I can't even imagine the level of desperation that would drive someone to do that.
It's almost impossible to comprehend.
So Miner wasn't lying.
The forensic evidence actually supports his story.
Really?
The angle of the wounds, the blood stains, it all points to Locker stabbing himself.
So this wasn't just a story Miner made up to avoid responsibility.
Nope. It seems like Locker was really the architect of his own demise.
So what happened to Miner after the suicide?
He panicked.
Understandably.
He grabbed Locker's bank card and some cash and ran.
He left Locker's body in the car.
Yeah.
And that's what led the police to him.
Using the bank card was his downfall.
It's amazing how even the most carefully planned crimes can unravel, just because of one small mistake.
One moment of panic.
So what happened to Miner? Did he face trial for Locker's murder?
He did, in 2011.
Wow, this whole thing is like something out of a movie.
The media was all over it, of course. It had everything. A successful motivational speaker with a dark secret, an ex-con caught in the middle of it all.
What was the defense's strategy?
They didn't deny Miner's involvement?
They didn't.
Nope. Instead, they focused on portraying Locker as the mastermind.
The mastermind of his own death.
Exactly.
So they were basically saying that Locker used Miner.
Manipulated him into being a part of this whole twisted plan.
Did it work?
The jury found Miner guilty of murder.
Guilty.
Yep. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
Wow. So that was it. Case closed.
Not quite.
Of course not. There's always another twist with this case.
Miner's lawyers appealed the verdict.
On what grounds?
They argued that the judge had made an error in instructing the jury. A few years later, their appeal was successful.
So the murder conviction was overturned.
Overturned.
What happened to Miner then?
He was granted a new trial,
A new trial.
this time on a lesser charge of manslaughter.
Manslaughter instead of murder.
Faced with the possibility of another trial, Miner decided to plead guilty.
Guilty to manslaughter.
Yep. He ended up serving a 12-year sentence.
A much shorter sentence than the original 20 years.
Exactly.
So in the end, the man who confessed to participating in this bizarre assisted suicide plot ended up serving a reduced sentence for manslaughter.
It's a strange ending to a strange story.
It really is. What about Locker's family? How did they react to all of this?
That's one of the most perplexing parts of this whole case.
What do you mean?
Locker's family remained completely silent throughout the entire ordeal.
Silent.
They never attended any court proceedings, never spoke to the media.
That's strange. You'd think they'd want to be involved, to seek justice.
You would, but they weren't.
Why not?
No one knows for sure.
Did they ever offer an explanation?
Nope. Their silence remains a mystery.
Some people think they were just overwhelmed by grief
Or maybe they knew more about Locker's double life than they let on.
and wanted to avoid the scandal.
Possibly.
What about the life insurance money? Did Locker's family ever get the $12 million?
That's another unanswered question.
Really?
One of the insurance companies refused to pay.
Why?
They cited the circumstances of Locker's death, the potential for foul play.
And the other companies?
They never publicly disclosed whether they paid out or not.
So, we don't know if Locker's family ever received the money.
We don't.
This whole case is just full of unanswered questions.
It's a story that stays with you.
It really does.
This case, it really makes you think, doesn't it? About success, about appearances, about the choices we make.
It's like we started with this image of a perfect life, the motivational speaker, the family man, the successful businessman.
And it all turned out to be a lie.
A carefully constructed facade, hiding a much darker reality.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much of what we see is real and how much is just smoke and mirrors.
It's like you can never really know what's going on behind closed doors. You know what I mean?
I do. It's a reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover.
And then there's Kenneth Miner, the ex-con, caught in the middle of all this.
He was just trying to get his life back on track.
And Locker took advantage of that. Used him, manipulated him.
It's a classic case of predator and prey.
It really makes you question the nature of free will. I mean, how much choice did Miner really have?
That's a tough one.
He was desperate, vulnerable, and Locker knew exactly how to exploit that.
He was a master manipulator after all.
It's hard not to feel some sympathy for Miner, even though he ultimately made some bad choices.
He was a victim, too, in a way.
What about Locker's family? They were completely absent throughout this whole ordeal.
Their silence is deafening, isn't it?
It is. You'd think they'd want to be involved, to speak out, to seek justice.
You would, but they didn't.
It's like they just wanted to pretend none of this ever happened.
Maybe they were just trying to protect themselves.
From the pain, the shame, the public scrutiny.
It's hard to say.
And we'll probably never know the full story.
Yep.
There are just too many unanswered questions.
Like, did they know about Locker's double life? Did they suspect the truth behind his death?
And did they ever receive that $12 million life insurance payout?
We may never know.
It's frustrating in a way to be left with so many loose ends.
But maybe that's the point.
What do you mean?
Maybe this case isn't about finding all the answers. Maybe it's about accepting that some things will always remain a mystery.
And maybe that's okay.
Maybe.
So what have we learned from this deep dive?
That appearances can be deceiving.
Definitely.
That success doesn't always equal happiness.
And that desperation can drive people to do some pretty crazy things.
And that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.
This case has been a wild ride.
It has.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the dark side of the American dream.
Until next time, stay curious and remember,
Yeah.
nothing is ever quite what it seems.